A starving native orphan, scorned by townsfolk and rejected by all, weeps in the dust. But when a rancher kneels before him and says, "I do," fate begins a tale of heartbreak, sacrifice, and unexpected family. The boy's voice cracked in the chill of the evening wind, the words tumbling out more like a cry than a statement. "No one wants a half-blood orphan like me." His thin frame trembled, his bare feet pressed into the cold dust of the street where he had been sitting since dawn. His name was Tahoma, and though his mother had whispered it with tenderness, no one in town spoke it now. They called him stray, half-breed, or worse, when they spoke of him at all. But today, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, the boy's small voice carried further than it should have, straight into the ears of the one man who was not looking away. Jonah Cartwright had been walking his horse slowly down the street, tired from the day's work at his ranch. His hat was low, his coat worn, and his hands rough from labor. He was no stranger to loneliness, his own family long buried beneath a hillside oak, but when he heard that desperate cry, it rooted him in place. Jonah dismounted without thinking, his boots heavy on the dirt as he crouched before the boy. The child's face was streaked with grime, his black hair tangled, his dark eyes swollen from holding back too many tears. Jonah reached out, steady but gentle, and lifted the boy's chin so he couldn't hide. "I do," Jonah said simply. No one else had stopped, no one else had cared, but Jonah's words broke through the despair like a lantern in a cave. Tahoma blinked hard, trying to make sense of what he had heard. He searched Jonah's face, waiting for the cruel smirk that usually followed such words from others. None came. The rancher's expression was steady, lined with weariness but warmed with sincerity. That was the moment when the boy's tears finally fell, no longer from despair, but from something even more frightening: hope. Yet the street was not silent. Voices rose quickly from porches and saloon doors. "Leave him, Jonah, you'll bring trouble," a merchant called out, his apron stained with flour. Another spat near Jonah's boots. "That boy's cursed blood will shame your land." The murmurs swelled, the crowd's disdain pressing against the fragile bond that had just begun. Jonah did not rise. He tightened his grip on Tahoma's small shoulder and lifted the boy to his feet, shielding him with his broad frame. "Then let it shame me," Jonah said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "A child left to starve is no curse. The shame is yours." His voice cut sharp through the twilight, and though no one dared answer, their eyes narrowed, their whispers carried venom. For the first time in his short life, Tahoma wasn't standing alone. But with every passing second, he realized this rancher was making himself a target. His stomach twisted, torn between clinging to the man's promise and running before he caused more harm. Jonah sensed it. "Stay close, boy. If you run now, you'll be lost for good." His hand held steady on Tahoma's back as he led him toward his horse. But the night wasn't going to let them pass so easily. A figure stepped out from the saloon doors, blocking their path. A man Jonah knew well, Reuben Haskett, the largest landholder in the county, and one of the loudest voices against anyone of native blood. His presence sent a hush over the street. "You drag filth onto your land, Cartwright." Reuben's voice was deep, his smile cruel. "Orphans like him don't grow into men, they grow into trouble. You want his blood mixing in your home. You'll regret it." His hand hovered near the pistol at his side, though his eyes glinted with something far more dangerous than the steel itself, contempt that would not be quenched. Jonah did not flinch. "He's a boy, that's all." He guided Tahoma behind him, though he could feel the boy trembling like a leaf in the wind. The standoff stretched long, every villager's eyes locked on them, waiting to see who would move first. Tahoma's heart pounded so hard it hurt. His entire life he had learned one truth: men like Reuben spoke and everyone else obeyed. If Jonah defied him, the rancher could lose everything. Why would a man risk so much for a boy who wasn't his own? And yet, Jonah's voice rang firm, unshaken. "He comes with me. Any man who tries to stop that will answer to me." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the snort of Jonah's horse. Reuben's lips curled, but he stepped aside, though the look he gave promised this was not the end. Jonah mounted and pulled Tahoma up into the saddle before him. The boy's small hands clutched Jonah's coat, his cheek pressed against the wool. For the first time, warmth touched his bones. As they rode out of town, the whispers behind them grew faint, but Tahoma's fear did not. He knew men like Reuben. He had seen how hatred could destroy lives. He wanted to believe Jonah's strength was enough, but deep down he knew this bond would soon be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. Night swallowed the plains as they rode toward the ranch. Jonah's land stretched wide, a humble home standing against the backdrop of endless stars. But as the horse slowed, Tahoma's grip tightened. He whispered, his voice small but urgent. "They won't let me stay, they'll come for me." Jonah's hand squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Let them come. You're mine now." His words carried a vow Tahoma had never known before, a vow that felt unbreakable. But as the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of horses on the move, both Jonah and the boy realized the fight for that vow was already beginning. The sound of distant hooves echoed through the night, faint at first but growing steadily until Tahoma's small hands clenched tighter against Jonah's coat. The boy's ears had been trained by hardship to catch danger long before others noticed it, and tonight was no exception. He pulled slightly at Jonah's sleeve, whispering urgently, "They're following." Jonah didn't answer right away, his eyes narrowing toward the black horizon. He had heard it too, the cadence of more than one rider, their pace fast, determined, and unafraid of the dark. Jonah eased his horse into the yard, the ranch house looming quiet ahead, its lantern casting a soft glow from the window. He didn't rush inside. Instead, he swung down and lifted Tahoma with him, setting the boy on the ground. "Inside," Jonah ordered gently, his hand steady against the child's shoulder. But Tahoma hesitated, staring at the horse's restless ears, at the dust already whispering along the trail behind them. He wanted to protest, to stay close, but Jonah's steady gaze left no room for argument. Tahoma slipped into the cabin, his heart thundering like the hooves he'd heard. Jonah stayed outside, standing in the center of his yard as the riders drew closer. His land was quiet save for the rustle of the night wind, the whisper of sagebrush, and the distant bark of a coyote. He could already picture who was coming, Reuben Haskett's men. He had seen their type 100 times before, men who carried their master's contempt like a badge, who thrived on intimidation and numbers. Jonah flexed his hand, not reaching for the rifle inside the cabin yet. He knew once steel was shown, there'd be no turning back. He wanted to meet them first with words, though he doubted words would carry far with men like these. The thunder of hooves broke across the ranch yard as 4 riders appeared, their silhouettes sharp against the pale moonlight. They slowed as they entered Jonah's land, each man stiff-backed, their faces half hidden by shadow and wide-brimmed hats. At the front rode a man Jonah recognized, Clancy Rowe, Reuben's foreman, a man with a voice like gravel and a reputation for cruelty. His smirk widened when his eyes found Jonah standing alone. "Evenin', Cartwright. We heard you picked yourself up some company." His tone carried mockery, but beneath it, Jonah could feel the edge of threat, sharp and cold. "You're on my land," Jonah answered, his voice even. "Say what you came to say, then ride out." Clancy chuckled low, leaning forward on his saddle. "You think you can keep him here? That boy's got blood no white man wants near. Reuben don't take kindly to disobedience, and you've made yourself a problem." The other riders shifted, their horses restless as if catching the tension that thickened the night air. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he stood firm. "The boy's not a problem. He's a child. He'll stay here. If Reuben has something to say, he can speak it to my face instead of sending dogs in the night." His words carried weight, but even as they left his mouth, he knew he was poking a hornet's nest. Men like Clancy didn't turn tail when insulted, they bared their teeth. Clancy's grin faltered, his hand brushing the stock of his rifle. "Careful, Jonah. You think you're righteous, but you'll find yourself alone quick. No one in town will stand with you. You want to tie your name to that orphan. Then when trouble comes, you'll be standing in the ashes by yourself." His words were cold, but his eyes glittered with anticipation, waiting for Jonah to flinch, to bend, to show weakness. But Jonah did not move. "Then let me stand alone. He's mine now. Ride back to Reuben and tell him what I said. Or," Jonah's eyes narrowed, his voice deepening like distant thunder, "try and take him yourself and see how far you get." The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. The riders shifted in their saddles, their hands twitching near their weapons, but none moved first. For a long moment, it was only the creak of leather and the steady sound of horses breathing. Then Clancy spat into the dirt, his smirk twisting bitter. "This ain't over, Cartwright. Reuben, don't forget. And that boy won't last long with you, you'll see." With a tug of his reins, Clancy turned, the other riders following him into the night. Their hooves pounded across the land until the sound faded into silence, leaving Jonah standing in the dust, his fists tight, his heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. Inside the cabin, Tahoma had pressed himself against the window, watching with wide eyes. His breath fogged the glass, his small body trembling from head to toe. When Jonah finally stepped inside, the boy darted back, guilt and fear written all over his face. "They'll hurt you because of me," Tahoma whispered, his voice breaking. "If I leave, they'll stop." Jonah closed the door firmly, bolting it. He knelt in front of the boy, his voice steady but not unkind. "You're not leaving. They came because they thought I'd scare easy. I didn't. That's the end of it tonight." But even as Jonah spoke, Tahoma could see the shadows in his eyes, the weight he carried. Jonah had defended him without hesitation, but the boy could not shake the feeling that he had brought danger into the only kindness he had ever known. The cabin felt too small for all that hung in the air. Jonah stoked the fire, its glow casting warmth across the room, but the silence between them felt colder than the night outside. Tahoma sat stiffly near the hearth, his thin hands folded in his lap, his stomach twisting with hunger he dared not voice. Jonah noticed, of course he did, and set a plate of bread and stew in front of him. "Eat," Jonah said, though his own portion was small. Tahoma's eyes filled, his fingers hovering above the food as though it might vanish if he touched it. "Go on," Jonah urged. "It's yours." And when the boy finally took a bite, his tears fell into the bowl, unseen but burning in his chest. They said little as the night dragged on, but sleep would not come easily. Tahoma curled in a blanket near the fire, his eyes open long after Jonah had settled in his bed. Every creak of the cabin, every howl of wind made the boy flinch, convinced Reuben's men would return. When at last his eyes grew heavy, dreams carried him into a place darker still. He dreamt of his mother, her voice calling his name, her face fading into shadows he could not reach. He woke with a start, a choked cry on his lips, and found Jonah already awake, sitting near the fire with his rifle across his knees. The man's eyes were steady, watching the door as though he hadn't slept at all. "You were dreaming," Jonah said quietly. Tahoma nodded, ashamed, pulling the blanket tighter. "Bad dreams don't mean you're weak," Jonah added. "They just mean you've lived through something real." For the first time, Tahoma dared to meet Jonah's gaze, and in that moment he believed the man's words. But his chest still ached with fear, and his heart still whispered the same question: how long before kindness turned to rejection, as it always had? The morning came too soon, the pale light of dawn spilling across the plains. Jonah stepped outside first, scanning the horizon, his eyes sharp. No riders came, no smoke rose in the distance, but he knew better than to think the danger had passed. Reuben was not a man who let go. The rancher's jaw tightened as he saddled his horse, his mind already churning. If he was to keep the boy safe, he needed more than words. He needed to prepare. Tahoma followed him out, blinking against the light. His small frame looked fragile against the wide-open land, and Jonah felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. He would protect this boy, but already he could feel the world pressing in, trying to rip them apart. And as Tahoma stepped hesitantly toward him, whispering, "Will you always mean it? That I'm yours?" Jonah knelt, his hand firm on the boy's shoulder, his voice steady. "Always," Jonah said. But even as he spoke, a hawk circled high above, its shadow cutting across the ground like an omen. And far beyond the hills unseen, men were already gathering, their whispers sharp, their intentions darker than the boy could yet imagine. The bond had been made, but the storm was only beginning. The hawk that circled overhead that morning seemed to stalk them long after it had flown beyond the ridgeline. Tahoma's eyes followed it nervously until it vanished into the horizon, but the unease it left behind clung to him like a shadow. Jonah noticed. He always noticed. The boy was still new to this land, still half convinced that every shadow meant danger, and every sound meant men were coming to drag him away. Jonah, hardened by years of solitude, had lived with that kind of suspicion too, but in Tahoma it broke his heart. "Come," Jonah said quietly, patting the saddle as he tightened the cinch. "You'll ride with me today. No sense hiding from the land if it's to be yours as much as mine." His tone was steady, but it carried something firm beneath it, an unspoken vow that Tahoma belonged, no matter who else said otherwise. Tahoma climbed up in front of him, his small frame pressed against Jonah's chest. The horse shifted under their weight, then carried them across the plains, where the morning light painted the world in gold. The boy's eyes widened at the endless stretch of grass and sky, at the slow river that caught the sun and shimmered like glass. He had never seen it from this high, never felt a man's arm steady him against the wind. It was dizzying, beautiful, and frightening all at once. But peace did not last. At the edge of Jonah's land, near the split-rail fence, they came upon the first sign that Reuben's reach was longer than last night's threat. A stake had been driven into the earth, and nailed to it was a crude board scrawled with black tar, "Filth belong here." The words cut across the morning stillness like a shout. Tahoma's breath caught and his small body stiffened. He tried to turn his face away, but Jonah caught his chin gently, forcing him to look. "You see that?" Jonah asked, his voice firm. "That's not truth. That's fear painted in big letters, and fear don't own us." He pulled the board free with one sharp tug and snapped it across his knee, tossing the pieces into the brush. "This land is yours as much as mine, boy, don't you forget it." But Tahoma's eyes filled anyway. He had lived his whole life hearing those words, filth, half-blood, orphan, and though Jonah broke the board, he could not break the memory of every sneer, every shove, every door slammed in his face. His voice cracked when he whispered, "They'll never stop." Jonah's jaw tightened, his arm around the boy's shoulders. "Then we'll never stop either, you and me. That's how it'll be." It sounded simple when Jonah said it, as if defiance itself could be a shield. But deep in his chest, Tahoma still carried the doubt of a child who had seen kindness vanish too many times. They rode on, Jonah showing him the boundary lines, the grazing fields, the river bend where cattle drank. The boy listened, trying to bury his fear in Jonah's steady voice, but his mind kept circling back to the sign. When they stopped at the stream to water the horse, Tahoma crouched at the bank, his reflection staring back at him. Dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, the features of a mother who had been cast aside, and a father he had never known. He hated how different he looked from Jonah, how easily others could point at him and say, "You don't belong." A tear slipped down before he could stop it, rippling the water. Jonah dismounted and crouched beside him. "What do you see?" he asked. "My mother," Tahoma whispered. "She looked like me. People hated her for it too. She told me once that blood makes us hated. Maybe she was right." His voice was heavy with a bitterness too old for a child. Jonah's hand gripped his shoulder. "Blood don't make a man hated. Cowards do. Men who can't see past their own pride. You're not what they call you. You're who you choose to be." His words were low, but the conviction in them was unshakable. Tahoma wanted to believe him, wanted to let those words root deep. But before he could answer, the thunder of hooves rose again, not distant this time, but near, fast, urgent. Jonah stiffened, his hand sliding instinctively to the rifle at his side. The boy's breath caught as he clutched Jonah's sleeve. "It's them," he whispered. They came back. Across the rise, 3 riders appeared, dust billowing behind them. They were Reuben's men from last night, but Jonah recognized them all the same, drifters who often hired out their fists and their guns to the highest bidder. That meant only one thing. Reuben had already put a price on his defiance. The lead rider, a lanky man with a scar running across his jaw, reined up sharp, his horse's nostrils flaring. "Cartwright," he called, his voice carrying across the stream. "Word is you've taken in a stray that don't belong. Best hand him over now. Save yourself trouble." Jonah rose to his full height, his rifle steady in his grip but not yet raised. "You're trespassing," he answered coolly. "You've got no business here. Turn around." The man with the scar chuckled, shaking his head. "You always thought you were bigger than the rest of us, Cartwright, but you're just one man. That boy's not worth losing land, cattle, and maybe your skin." His companions smirked, their hands resting on their pistols. Tahoma's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to disappear before Jonah got hurt because of him. He tugged at Jonah's coat desperately. "Please," he whispered. "I can go. Don't fight them for me." Jonah didn't move. His voice, when it came, was steady as stone. "You're not going anywhere. Not today, not ever. They want you, they'll have to go through me." The silence that followed was charged, the riders shifting in their saddles, waiting for the first spark. The scarred man leaned forward, his smile gone cold. "So be it." His hand twitched toward his pistol, too fast for Tahoma's eyes to follow, but Jonah was quicker, his rifle snapping up like it had always belonged in his hands. He fired into the dirt just inches from the horse's hooves. The beast reared, the rider cursing as he fought for control. Dust and panic filled the air, and in that chaos Jonah's voice rang out like thunder. "Next shot won't miss, now ride." The riders hesitated, their bravado cracking under the weight of Jonah's steady aim. They knew his reputation, he didn't bluff. With a snarl, the scarred man yanked his reins, spinning his horse away. The others followed, but not without spitting curses into the wind. "This ain't over, Cartwright," one shouted as they disappeared over the ridge. When the dust settled, Tahoma's legs gave out and he collapsed at the water's edge, shaking uncontrollably. Jonah crouched beside him, pulling the boy against his chest, the rifle still warm in his other hand. "You're safe," he murmured, but Tahoma's tears came hot and heavy. "No, I'm not," he cried. "Not with me here. They'll keep coming and it'll be my fault." Jonah pulled him closer, his voice unyielding. "Listen to me. This is not your fault. Men like Reuben will always find a reason to hate. You're not the cause, you're just the excuse. But I'll tell you this, boy, I won't bend and I won't let them take you." Tahoma clung to him, his sobs quieting only when Jonah's words sank deep enough to dull the fear. Still, doubt gnawed at him. How could one man stand against so many? And how long before Jonah decided it wasn't worth it? They returned to the cabin before sundown, both weary but alert. Jonah set extra locks on the doors, lit lanterns in every window, and loaded every rifle he owned. Tahoma watched silently, torn between awe at Jonah's resolve and dread at the storm gathering around them. When night fell, the boy could not sleep. He sat by the fire, staring at the door, whispering to himself words his mother once told him. "The night only wins if you let it." He didn't know if he believed them anymore. Jonah didn't sleep either. He paced the floor, the weight of responsibility pressing hard. He had chosen this boy, chosen to claim him, but the cost was climbing faster than he expected. Still, every time he looked at Tahoma's face, so fragile, so desperate for a place to belong, he knew there was no turning back. As the fire burned low and the wind moaned through the cracks, Jonah knelt by the boy's side. "Hear me, Tahoma. No matter what comes, you're not alone. Not again. You hear me?" The boy nodded, but his eyes still shimmered with doubt. And outside, in the distance where the plains met the stars, another group of riders was already moving. This time, they weren't just here to threaten. They were coming with fire in their saddlebags and blood on their minds. The night felt heavy before it ever broke. Tahoma could sense it even as he lay wrapped in a blanket near the hearth, his eyes open and darting toward the shuttered window with every gust of wind. Jonah hadn't gone to bed at all. He stood like a watchman at the table, cleaning and reloading rifles, his jaw set tight. The silence between them was broken only by the low crackle of the fire and the occasional clink of steel against wood. It was the kind of silence that spoke of something coming, something you could not stop, only brace yourself for. Tahoma's stomach twisted with fear. He whispered into the blanket, almost hoping Jonah wouldn't hear. "They'll burn the house. I've seen men do it. They'll wait till we sleep and burn us inside." His voice shook, and though he was trying to be quiet, the terror in it was unmistakable. Jonah turned, kneeling beside him, his face cast in the orange glow of the fire. "I'm not sleeping, and neither are you, not tonight. They try fire, they'll find more than smoke waiting for them." He put his hand on the boy's thin shoulder, firm but not rough. "You trust me?" Tahoma's throat worked as he nodded. Trust didn't come easily, not for a child who had known more cruelty than care. But something in Jonah's eyes, steady, unflinching, anchored him. It was the first time in his short life that the word safe had meant more than a dream. The hours crawled by, every tick of the clock marking louder than usual. And then, just past midnight, it came, the faintest sound at first, then louder, deliberate. The crunch of hooves in the frost outside. Jonah lifted a hand for silence, his eyes narrowing. He extinguished the lantern on the table, plunging the cabin into near darkness, the fire a dull glow. Tahoma's small hand slipped into his without thinking. Jonah squeezed it once, then moved to the window, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to see. His gut clenched. Riders, at least half a dozen, stood just beyond the fence line. Torches burned in their hands, their glow flickering against the black sky. They weren't hiding anymore. This was a warning or a declaration. Jonah turned back, his voice low but steady. "They'll test us first, want to see if I'll break before they waste the fire, but I won't, and neither will you." He handed Tahoma a smaller pistol, the wood polished smooth with use. "You keep this close. Don't use it unless I tell you. Understand?" Tahoma's fingers trembled as he gripped it. He had never held a weapon before, but the weight of it was sobering. He nodded, though fear churned in his chest like a storm. Outside, voices called. "Cartwright," one barked. "You've got till the count of 3 to send that half-breed out or we'll come get him." Laughter followed, harsh and merciless. Jonah stepped to the door, rifle in hand, and spoke loud enough to be heard. "You're trespassing on my land. Leave now and no harm will come. Stay and you'll answer for it." His voice cut across the night like a whip. Silence followed, but only for a moment. Then came the slow count. 1, the riders jeered, their torches waving. Tahoma's breath caught. He wanted to run, to throw the door open and surrender, anything to stop what was about to happen. His voice cracked as he pleaded, "Jonah, let me go, please. They'll kill you because of me." Jonah didn't look back. His eyes stayed on the door, his voice steady as bedrock. "No one's taking you, not while I stand." 2, the count grew louder, the torches raised higher. Jonah raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel toward the faint outlines through the crack in the shutters. Tahoma squeezed his pistol tighter, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. 3. The door rattled as the first man charged forward, but Jonah fired before he ever reached it. The crack of the rifle split the night, and a torch fell to the dirt outside. Shouts erupted, curses echoing, horses rearing in panic. The riders hadn't expected him to fire so quickly, and chaos spread among them. "Get back," Jonah barked, shoving the table against the door. "Stay low." Tahoma dropped behind the bed, clutching the pistol with both hands. The sound outside grew wild, hooves pounding, voices yelling orders. Another torch hurled against the wall of the cabin only to sputter out on the damp wood. The men weren't leaving. They were circling, regrouping, testing the defenses like wolves around a campfire. One of them shouted, his voice carrying hatred sharp as steel. "We'll smoke you out, Cartwright. That boy ain't worth dying over." Jonah fired again through the window, the glass shattering, and the voice cut off mid-sentence. The silence that followed was broken only by the fading echo of the shot. Then came retreating hoofbeats, pulling back just out of range. For a moment the cabin was still, save for Tahoma's quick, shallow breaths. He crawled toward Jonah, his voice breaking. "They'll come back with more. You can't fight them all." Jonah lowered the rifle, reloading calmly, though his own pulse thundered in his ears. "Maybe I can't, but I'll fight as long as I breathe. And if I fall, you'll take what I've given you and run, you hear? You'll live." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't want to live without you." The words came raw, unguarded, a child's heart laid bare. Jonah froze, the rifle half-loaded, as those words cut deeper than any threat outside. He set the gun down, pulling Tahoma into his arms. "You won't have to," Jonah said hoarsely. But even as he whispered it, he knew the truth. Reuben wouldn't stop. This was only the beginning. The rest of the night passed without another attack, but neither of them slept. At dawn, Jonah saddled the horse again, his mind set on a new course. "We ride to town," he told Tahoma, "not to beg, but to show them. If they want to tear us down, they'll have to look us in the eye while they do it." The boy's stomach nodded, but he nodded. He didn't want to face the sneers and jeers, but something in Jonah's tone told him this wasn't about choice. It was about standing. They rode into town mid-morning, every eye turning as the pair appeared. Jonah sat tall in the saddle, his face unreadable, while Tahoma clung to him, every nerve screaming under the weight of so many stares. Whispers rose like a tide. "That's the boy. Cartwright's lost his mind. Reuben'll crush him." And then Reuben himself stepped from the saloon, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the street. His smile was slow, venomous. "Cartwright," he drawled, "I warned you." Jonah reined in, his eyes locked on the man. "You'll get no Orphan from me. He's mine now. And if you want to challenge that, say it plain in front of the whole town." His voice rang out, echoing against wood and glass. The crowd hushed, every man and woman holding their breath. Reuben's smile faltered, his pride tested before witnesses. He stepped closer, his boots heavy in the dust, his eyes cutting like knives. "You'll regret this, Cartwright," he said low, just for Jonah to hear. "That boy will be the death of you." Jonah's voice came back louder, steady as a hammer on an anvil. "Then let it be my death, but he will not be yours." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the creak of saddles and the shuffling of feet. The town had never seen a man stand so openly against Reuben. Tahoma's heart pounded, his fingers digging into Jonah's coat. And though no bullets flew that morning, Jonah knew war had just been declared, not with words but with eyes, and with the promise of what was to come. They rode out of town, the weight of 100 stares pressing against their backs. And from the saloon porch, Reuben's men watched, their hands twitching near their belts, their whispers carrying across the dusty street. The storm was gathering fast, and Jonah and Tahoma were at the center of it. That night back at the ranch, Jonah set his rifle by the door, his eyes scanning the horizon long after the sun sank. Tahoma sat by the fire, whispering to himself the same question over and over. How long can one man stand against them all? And though Jonah didn't answer aloud, he asked himself the same thing. The days that followed stretched long and tense, each one like a rope pulled tighter toward breaking. Jonah worked the land by daylight, teaching Tahoma how to mend fences and feed cattle, but his eyes never strayed far from the horizon. At night, he kept the rifle by the door, his boots on, ready for trouble. It wasn't if it would come, it was when. Tahoma, though, felt the strain in ways Jonah could not. Every look in town, every whisper carried on the wind, dug into him like barbed wire. He had lived his whole life unwanted, but now the hatred was louder, sharper, directed not just at him but at the man who dared to claim him. And though Jonah's words had been steady, "You're mine now," the boy's heart still whispered the question that haunted him. How long before Jonah grew tired of the fight? On the third day, Jonah returned from the far pasture to find Tahoma kneeling by the stream, his small frame hunched, his hands clenched into fists. His reflection wavered on the water's surface, and Jonah could see the boy was speaking to it like it were another person. "You ruin everything," Tahoma muttered. "If I wasn't here, he'd be safe. He'd still have peace." His voice cracked, tears slipping into the current. "Why didn't God make me different? Why did he make me like this?" Jonah's boots crunched in the gravel and Tahoma spun, startled, his eyes wide with shame. He hadn't meant to be heard. Jonah crouched beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder, his grip strong. "Don't you curse yourself, boy. Don't you put God's work to shame. You're not broken. It's the men who hate you who are." Tahoma shook his head, sobbing. "They'll kill you because of me." Jonah's jaw worked, his gaze on the water, his voice low but firm. "If they kill me, it won't be because of you. It'll be because I chose to stand where others wouldn't. And if I fall, I'd fall glad, knowing I stood for what mattered." The boy's breath hitched, and he buried his face against Jonah's coat, clinging as though the man were the last solid thing in a world of shadows. Jonah held him there, his own chest tight. He hadn't expected to care this deeply, hadn't planned for his heart to be tied to the boy so quickly. But now, letting him go would be like cutting out his own soul. That night, as the fire burned low, a knock came at the door, not harsh but hesitant. Jonah lifted his rifle and motioned Tahoma back. He cracked the door just enough to see. On the porch stood an old preacher, Reverend Amos, lantern in hand, his white beard catching the glow. "Jonah," the old man said softly, "I come not with malice but warning. Reuben's stirring the town, says you've brought shame and danger to all of us. Some believe him, some don't dare speak, but the tide's turning against you." Jonah opened the door wider, though he kept his rifle cradled. "And what do you say, Reverend?" The preacher's eyes shifted to where Tahoma peeked from behind the table. His expression softened, grief flickering across his features. "I say a child's not to blame for the sins of men, but truth is, Jonah, standing alone against Reuben will cost more than you reckon, and when it does, I fear the boy will pay alongside you." Jonah's jaw tightened. "Then stand with me, speak the truth." Amos sighed, lowering his gaze. "I will speak what I can, but fear is a loud preacher, louder than me. Guard your home, Jonah, guard it well." With that, he turned into the night, leaving Jonah with more weight on his shoulders than before. The following evening, the storm came. It began with smoke on the horizon, faint but growing, the smell sharp and bitter. Jonah and Tahoma climbed the rise to see it. Flames devoured the small homestead of the Whitaker family, a mile east. Jonah's stomach sank. This was Reuben's doing, a message sent. He knew the Whitakers had nothing to do with him or the boy, but their land was close, their house vulnerable. Tahoma's eyes widened in horror. "They'll burn us next," the boy whispered, clutching Jonah's arm. Jonah's eyes stayed fixed on the smoke. "Then they'll find we don't burn easy." The morning sun burned away the mist as the woman stood at the fence, the white cloth trembling in her hand. She looked half broken, her hair tangled, her dress torn, her lips cracked from thirst, but her eyes carried a desperate fire. Jonah kept his rifle steady, suspicion carved into every line of his face. Tahoma crouched low beside the window, peering out with wide eyes, his chest tight with fear and curiosity all at once. "State your name," Jonah called, his voice sharp, carrying over the still air. The woman swallowed, clutching the cloth tighter. "My name is Clara Vance. I came from Reuben's camp. Please, I mean no harm. Her voice wavered, but it did not break. Jonah did lower the rifle. Then why carry his name on your tongue? He sends men with torches and bullets, now he sends you. Speak plain before I lose my patience. Clara shook her head quickly, her free hand rising in defense. I didn't come on his orders. I came because I couldn't stand it anymore. He's planning worse than fire, worse than what you've seen. He means to tear you down, Jonah Cartwright, piece by piece until nothing's left but ash, and he'll use that boy to do it. Tahoma flinched at her words, pulling back from the window as if her voice itself carried danger. His stomach twisted, the same question pounding in his chest. Why me? Why am I always the reason for ruin? He wanted to run, to shut his ears, but he couldn't. Jonah stepped out onto the porch, rifle still in hand, but his posture more measured now. Why should I believe a word you say? Clara's lips pressed tight, her eyes glistening as though shame burned her. Because I've stood in his camp and seen what he's planning. He's gathering more men, riders from 2 towns over. He'll come not just to burn, but to claim. He means to take the boy and make an example of him. Says he'll drag him through the street until no one dares offer shelter to his kind again. A choked cry slipped from Tahoma's throat before he could stop it. Jonah turned sharply, his heart hammering at the terror etched on the boy's face. He stepped back inside, closing the door with a firm hand. You hear that? Jonah said, kneeling before him, his voice steady despite the fire in his chest. That's not fate, that's a threat, and a threat can be answered. But if it's true, Tahoma whispered, trembling, if he brings all those men, you can't stop them all. His eyes filled, his voice breaking. He'll take me. He'll hurt you because of me. Why can't I just go, Jonah? If I leave, it ends. Jonah gripped his shoulders, forcing the boy to meet his eyes. You're not leaving. You think running makes it end. No, it makes them win, and I won't let them win. His voice softened then, a deep ache beneath the steel. I chose you, Tahoma, and I'll keep choosing you no matter what it costs. Tears spilled down the boy's cheeks. He wanted to believe. He wanted to bury himself in Jonah's words and never doubt again. But fear gnawed at him like hunger, relentless. Jonah rose and went back to the door, opening it once more. Clara still stood at the fence, her hands trembling now as much from exhaustion as fear. Why tell me this? He demanded. What do you gain from turning on Reuben? Her voice cracked, raw with pain. Because I once believed him. I believed his lies about blood and worth. I thought if I stood with him, I'd be safe. But last night, I saw him put a torch to a family's barn with children still inside. I heard those children scream. I can't stay silent anymore. Jonah's grip on the rifle tightened. He had seen Reuben's cruelty, but this, children burned to prove a point, lit a fire in him hotter than any torch could. He stepped forward, his voice like stone. If you're lying, I'll know it soon enough. If you're telling the truth, then you're not safe with him anymore. You'd best decide where you stand. Clara's chin lifted, though her body shook. I stand here, if you'll let me. Jonah studied her for a long moment, then finally lowered the rifle. Then step inside. Tahoma's eyes widened as Clara entered the cabin. He shrank back, unsure if he could trust her, unsure if she was another trick. But Clara dropped to her knees before him, tears spilling freely now. I'm sorry, she whispered. For every word I never spoke against him. For every silence that let men like him think they had the right. I can't undo it, but I won't let him hurt you if I can stop it. The boy's throat ached. He didn't know whether to push her away or believe her. Jonah watched silently, knowing this moment wasn't his to answer, it was Tahoma's. The boy stayed quiet, his tears falling, but he didn't turn from her. That was enough. For 2 days, Clara remained with them. She told Jonah everything she knew, where Reuben's camp was, how many men he had already gathered, what weapons they carried. It was worse than Jonah feared. Nearly 20 men, some hired from out of state, men with no loyalty except to coin and cruelty. Jonah listened, his jaw set, his mind already grinding. Tahoma clung to him more in those days, never straying far from his side. He had nightmares each night, dreams of being dragged through the street, of Jonah lying still in the dust while flames devoured everything around them. Jonah held him each time he woke, whispering steady truths against the boy's fear. You are mine. You will not be taken. I will not bend. But by the 3rd night, Jonah knew defense alone would not save them. We can't wait for him to bring the fight here, he said, his voice low, his eyes on the rifle laid across the table. If he means to burn the world around us, we'll have to take the fire from his hands first." Clara looked at him with both fear and hope. "You mean to ride to his camp?" Jonah nodded. "Not to kill, at least not yet. To show him I don't scare. To warn him that if he crosses my line again, he'll pay more than he reckons." Tahoma's breath caught. "No," he cried, clinging to Jonah's arm. "If you go to him, he'll kill you. He has too many men." His small body shook, his tears wetting Jonah's sleeve. Jonah gathered him close, his voice steady but carrying an ache. "If I stay, he'll come anyway. If I go, maybe I can stall him, make him think twice. I'd rather meet the storm on my feet than wait for it to drown us in our sleep." Tahoma's chest heaved, his voice cracking. "Then I'm going with you." Jonah froze, staring at the boy, at the fierce determination blazing through the tears. "No," Jonah said firmly. "It's not your fight." The boy shook his head hard. "It is my fight, because it's me he hates. If he sees I won't run, maybe he'll stop. Please, Jonah, don't make me hide while you bleed for me." The silence that followed was heavy. Clara watched with wide eyes, her own tears glistening. Jonah wanted to refuse, to lock the boy inside the cabin and face Reuben alone. But when he looked into Tahoma's eyes, he saw something he couldn't deny: the desperate need to stand beside the only man who had ever claimed him. At last, Jonah cupped the boy's face in his hands. "Then you'll ride with me. But hear me, Tahoma, your job isn't to fight, it's to stand. You do that and you'll be braver than any man with a gun." The boy nodded, his tears falling, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and resolve. He didn't know if he could do it, but he would try. For Jonah. For the chance to prove he was more than the names they called him. The next dawn they rode out together, Clara watching from the cabin porch, her hands clasped as if in prayer. Jonah sat tall in the saddle, Tahoma in front of him, the boy's small hands gripping the horn. Ahead lay Reuben's camp, a nest of vipers waiting. As the horizon burned with morning light, Jonah whispered into the boy's hair, "Whatever comes, you remember this. You're mine, and I don't let go." Tahoma closed his eyes against the wind, clutching Jonah's arm, his heart screaming with both terror and hope. He didn't know what awaited them beyond the rise, but he knew one truth now, steady as the beat of Jonah's heart against his back. For the first time, he was not alone. And as they crested the ridge, Reuben's camp came into view, fires burning, men already mounting their horses, as if they'd been expecting him all along. The ridge fell away before them, revealing Reuben's camp sprawled like a wound across the valley floor. Smoke curled from a dozen fires, the silhouettes of armed men moving between them like restless shadows. Horses were tethered near the creek, stamping and snorting, sensing the unease in their masters. Even from this distance, Tahoma could hear the sharp bark of laughter, the ring of steel, the cruel sound of men eager for a fight they believed already won. Jonah reined in at the crest, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the scene. Tahoma sat stiff in front of him, his small fingers digging into the saddle horn, his heart thundering so loud he was sure the riders below could hear it. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to hide, to vanish into the wilderness before these men saw him. But Jonah's steady arm anchored him, reminding him of the promise spoken only hours before. "You're mine, and I don't let go." The boy swallowed hard. "Jonah," he whispered, his voice cracking, "there's too many." Jonah's jaw worked as he surveyed the camp. A man doesn't count numbers when he's standing for what's right. He counts the ground beneath his feet and asks if it's worth dying on. And this ground, he pointed at the valley below, isn't theirs. It's ours, long as we don't surrender it. Before Tahoma could answer, a horn sounded from the camp. Heads snapped up, voices rose, and in moments, riders mounted. Dust plumed as a dozen men surged forward, armed and ready, their leader at the front. Reuben Haskett himself. He cut a commanding figure astride his black horse, broad-shouldered, his gray coat snapping in the wind. His eyes locked on Jonah immediately, cold and venomous, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. He raised a hand and his men slowed, fanning out behind him. The message was clear. This was not a negotiation. This was a show of dominance. Jonah nudged his horse forward, descending the ridge until he and Tahoma stood at the edge of the creek, the water running between them and Reuben's line. Jonah raised his chin, his voice ringing across the distance. "You brought a crowd, Reuben, afraid to stand alone." Laughter rippled through the riders, but Reuben didn't flinch. I don't stand alone because I don't have to. That's the difference between us, Cartwright. You chose filth and now you'll choke on it. Hand over the boy and maybe I let you crawl back to your ranch with what's left. Jonah's grip on the reins tightened, his voice booming back. The boy's not yours to claim. He never was. He's mine now and no man alive will change that. Reuben's smile vanished, replaced by a sneer. He's a half-blood orphan, Jonah. He'll bring you nothing but grief. Why throw your life away on something so worthless? At those words, Tahoma flinched as if struck. His vision blurred with sudden tears, his chest squeezing until he could barely breathe. Worthless. It was the word he'd heard his whole life, the word that had chased him into shadows and silence. He wanted to curl in on himself, to disappear before the sting of it could crush him. But then Jonah leaned down, his voice low but fierce in the boy's ear. Don't you listen, don't you believe. You're worth more than all of them put together. Tahoma blinked hard, fighting back the tears, his small fists clenching against the horn. For the first time, he wanted to believe Jonah more than he feared Reuben. Jonah sat tall in the saddle, his voice carrying across the creek. You call him orphan, half-blood filth. I call him son, and the only way you take him from me is over my dead body. Gasps rose even from the riders behind Reuben, the declaration sharper than any bullet. Reuben's face darkened, rage flaring in his eyes. So be it. He raised his hand, and in an instant, guns glinted in the sun. Down, boy, Jonah barked, shoving Tahoma low against the saddle as the first shots rang out. The crack of rifles split the air, bullets hissing past like hornets. Jonah wheeled his horse, firing back with practiced precision. A man toppled from his saddle, another's hat flew as Jonah's bullet split it clean. Dust exploded around them, the world dissolving into chaos. Tahoma clung desperately, every muscle screaming with terror. He wanted to close his eyes to shut it all out, but Jonah's words echoed in his head. Your job isn't to fight, it's to stand. So he held on, refusing to let go, even as fear clawed at his chest. The creek churned red as horses splashed through, men charging, shouting. Jonah's rifle cracked again and again until it was empty. With one swift motion, he slung it aside and drew his pistol, his jaw set like iron. He shot a rider who lunged too close, the man toppling into the water with a scream. But for every man that fell, more pressed forward. Reuben's numbers were overwhelming. Jonah fought with the fury of a cornered lion, but the noose was tightening. Tahoma's breath came in gasps, his small hands gripping Jonah's coat. We can't win, he cried. Jonah sat propped against the wall, pale but unbroken. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, a strip of cloth tied tight to slow the bleeding. Every movement sent a tremor of pain through him, but his eyes, clear, steady, unyielding, betrayed none of it. He had refused to lie down to rest, even as Clara begged him. You'll tear it open again, she warned, her hands trembling as she pressed a fresh rag against the wound. I'd rather tear it than leave him to face this alone, Jonah answered, his voice rough but firm. He turned his gaze to Tahoma, who sat on the floor, clutching the pistol Jonah had given him days ago. The boy's hands shook, but not with fear alone. There was resolve there, too, burning through the terror. Clara looked between them, her own face pale. There's too many. You can't fight them all. I saw how many Reuben gathered. 20 men, maybe more. They'll come before dawn and they'll come to kill. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from Tahoma. Then we meet them here. This house has stood through storms before. It'll stand through one more. Tahoma's throat worked as he tried to swallow the fear choking him. He wanted to tell Jonah not to fight, to run, to hide, but something deeper, stronger, kept him silent. He had seen Jonah bleed for him, had heard him call him son before a valley of enemies. If Jonah could face death without flinching, then so could he. Clara lit every lantern in the cabin, placing them by the windows to make the house glow like a beacon in the dark. If he's bringing fire, she said, her voice tight, we may as well show him we don't burn easy. The hours crawled by, heavy with waiting. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the shutters made Tahoma flinch. He sat close to Jonah, watching him reload the rifle with methodical precision, every movement deliberate despite the pain. Jonah caught the boy staring and reached out, resting his hand on his shoulder. You're not weak, Jonah said softly. Don't let fear tell you otherwise. Tears stung Tahoma's eyes, but he nodded, clutching the pistol tighter. He whispered, "If you fall, I'll stand." The words trembled, but they were true. Jonah's eyes softened, pride flickering through the weariness. "That's all I ask." The night deepened, and then it came, the sound they'd been waiting for. Hooves, dozens of them pounding against the hard earth like thunder. The ground itself seemed to shiver under their weight. Torches glowed in the distance, a river of fire snaking across the plains toward the cabin. Tahoma's heart raced so hard he thought it might burst. He crouched by the window, peering out. Reuben's men came in force, their shouts carrying across the dark, their laughter cruel. And at the front, Reuben himself, his black horse a shadow against the flames, his face twisted in fury. He reined up just outside the fence, his voice booming. "Cartwright, I gave you chance after chance, and still you defied me. Tonight I'll end this farce. I'll take the boy and burn your house to the ground so no fool ever dares defy me again." Jonah stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, his body framed by the lantern light. His voice carried across the yard, steady as iron. "You'll take nothing from me. Not tonight, not ever." A murmur rippled through the riders, but Reuben only sneered. He raised his torch high, signaling his men. "Burn it." Chaos erupted. Torches flew through the night, flames licking against the cabin walls. Bullets cracked, glass shattered, splinters flying. Jonah fired back, his rifle roaring, each shot precise, felling men from their saddles. Clara ducked low, tossing buckets of water against the walls as fire licked up the wood. Tahoma crouched beside the bed, pistol in hand, his breath ragged, waiting for Jonah's call. "Now, boy," Jonah barked as a rider charged the porch. Tahoma's heart seized, but he raised the pistol with trembling hands and fired. The shot rang wild, splintering wood, but it startled the rider enough that Jonah finished him with a rifle round. "Good," Jonah shouted, his voice fierce. "That's standing, boy, don't you falter." The fight raged on, the cabin groaning under the assault. Smoke filled the air, heat seared the walls, but still Jonah stood, firing until his rifle clicked empty, then grabbing the pistol at his belt. Tahoma stayed low, his small body pressed against the floorboards, but his heart burned with defiance. Then Reuben himself rode forward, his black horse charging through the smoke. He swung down, revolver gleaming, his eyes locked on the door. "Cartwright," he bellowed, "you can't stop me. That boy will kneel in the dirt before this night ends." Jonah stepped onto the porch, his pistol raised despite the blood soaking his shoulder. His voice rang out like a hammer on steel. "He kneels to no man. Not you, not ever." The two men faced each other in the firelight, smoke swirling, the night alive with the clash of gunfire and shouts. For a moment, everything else faded, the riders, the flames, the fear. It was only Jonah and Reuben, two men standing on opposite sides of a line drawn in blood and hate. Reuben sneered, raising his revolver. "Then die with him." The shots rang out almost as one. Jonah staggered, his pistol clattering to the porch. Reuben stumbled too, his revolver spinning from his grasp as blood blossomed across his chest. He collapsed into the dirt, his men shouting in disarray. "Jonah!" Tahoma screamed, rushing to the porch as Jonah swayed. He caught him as he fell to his knees, clutching his side. The boy's tears poured hot and fast, his small hands fumbling against the blood. "No, no, you promised. You can't leave me." Jonah's hand gripped his shoulder, weak but steady. His voice came hoarse but clear. "I told you I don't let go." Reuben's men faltered without their leader. Clara fired through the window, striking one, and Jonah's last words carried enough weight to scatter the rest. They turned, retreating into the dark, their shouts fading into silence. The yard fell still, the flames crackling, the air heavy with smoke. Clara rushed out, helping Tahoma drag Jonah inside as the fire licked the porch. Together they beat the flames back, pouring water until only smoke remained. The cabin stood charred and battered, but it stood. Jonah lay on the floor, pale, his breath ragged. Tahoma clung to his hand, refusing to let go. "Don't die," he sobbed. "Please don't leave me alone." Jonah's eyes fluttered open, his gaze locking on the boy. In that look was every vow, every ounce of love he hadn't spoken but had lived. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Never again, you're my son." Tahoma's tears spilled, but through them broke a sob of relief, of something he'd never known before, belonging. He laid his head against Jonah's chest, hearing the faint but steady beat of his heart, and for the first time in his life, he believed the words. Dawn broke over the plains, the light falling on a cabin scarred but standing, and within it a boy no longer orphan, no longer half-blood, no longer unwanted. He was Tahoma Cartwright now, son of the man who had bled and fought and nearly died to claim him. The war was not over. Reuben's men still roamed, and the land would never be free of hatred. But in that cabin, father and son sat together, bound by something stronger than blood, by choice, by sacrifice, by love that defied the world. And as Tahoma looked out the window at the rising sun, his heart whispered words he had never dared believe. I am wanted. I belong.